at issue. Thanks for taking my question this week.
My question is...
I would like to ask...
My question for the panel is...
My question for the at issue panel is...
It's been a long and busy few months. Lots of months, actually, in Canadian politics, from the management of the pandemic to questions about reconciliation and now, of course, election speculation. So before At Issue takes a short summer hiatus, it might be shorter than we would like. We wanted to continue our tradition and take some time to let you ask the question. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj all joining me tonight for that. Yes, a short break, maybe very short, but let's just hope we get a little one. Let's start with this question from Charles Pender.
For the last 18 months, we've been dealing with everything COVID. And now, as we seem to be coming out of the COVID crisis, my question for the panel is, what do you think is the most pressing issue facing Canadians in 2021 as we head into a fall election?
Okay, we're going to try and trip through these pretty quickly. Andrew, your answer to that, the most pressing issue for Canadians if we head into an election.
It's, I think, the aftermath of the pandemic, which is that we've built up an enormous amount of deficit and debt at both the federal and provincial level. We're basically banking on it being solved by interest rates staying low forever, but interest rates may not stay low forever. So we've got potentially a very serious problem on our hands that we haven't begun to address.
Althea.
I would say getting people back to work, and for younger voters, the environment.
Chantal.
Climate change, which has not taken a pause during the pandemic and which is still looming, and the consequences are becoming more dire with impact on the economy, and that is waiting for politicians to address after the pandemic.
Okay, we're going to move on to a question that we got on Twitter from Cheryl. She asked you about your thoughts on Ombudsman Lick's report. This is the report about how the military is conducting itself in light of the role of the Ombudsman, the Prime Minister, and the Defence Minister. We had multiple questions, I should say, about the future of Minister Sajjan. So that's the question here. Can Minister Sajjan survive that right now? What do we think? Althea, you want to go first?
In the short term, he will survive. If the Liberals are re-elected, I would be surprised if he remains Minister of National Defence. The Ombudsman's report had a number of very good suggestions, notably making him accountable to Parliament. The Liberals have countered, saying that that is something Madame Arbeau will be looking at in her report. Clearly, there's an institutional problem, but there is also a ministerial problem in that the minister doesn't seem to understand what his responsibility are, and he has no sense, seemingly, of ministerial accountability and willingness to take responsibility. So that's why I think he will not be there in the long term.
Chantal.
If the Prime Minister is not going to call an election in August, he will have to shuffle his cabinet. That's usually what you do at mid-mandate, and in this case, shuffling is in order, and if he does have to shuffle, he will have to appoint a new defense minister. You can have a debate over Sajjan's responsibilities in the current mess, but it is hard to have a debate over the fact that he's not the person to move this file forward. His credibility is basically shot. And I still have a question for former Justice Louise Arbour, who is supposed to make recommendations to the government. What exactly is she supposed to be doing when one of her former colleagues has already handed the government a report in 2015 that was ignored?
Andrew.
Prime ministers don't like to give the opposition heads on pikes, and so yes, they will probably wait until a cabinet shuffle rather than simply decommissioning him himself. In a way, that's fair. I mean, the Prime Minister's office's fingerprints are all over this affair. It's not just about Sajjan. He is, to some extent, a scapegoat. And the whole doctrine of ministerial responsibility arose in an age when ministers actually were responsible, when they had something useful to do. In this age, when things are so centrally orchestrated out of the Prime Minister's office, they essentially become the scapegoat, the person you blame when things go wrong because you can't allow the blame to attach to the Prime Minister. Maybe that's the way of the world, but I kind of sympathize. As badly as he may have handled this, it wasn't just his responsibility.
Okay, here's a question from Parmdeep Singh about another minister's performance.
How would you evaluate work of public procurement department, including minister and public services, during this past year and a half of pandemic.
So Premdeep wants us to examine how Minister Anita Anand has performed as Minister of Procurement. She certainly had to procure a lot. Chantal.
I think she's done really well, not just because the vaccine rollout worked out a lot better than the opposition had predicted back in December and January, and a lot of pundits, but also because I found that she's a great communicator who sticks to her message, doesn't try to build it into spin, very efficient, and a kind of a discovery, because this is a new minister and a new MP that few people knew anything about, who ended up in a hot seat that usually isn't. So I found her performance quite impressive.
Andrew.
Mixed. We got a lot of vaccines in sheer volume. We didn't get them in a terribly timely fashion. We were an outlier on the downside amongst countries for the first few months of the vaccination campaign. And that matters. It matters when you get vaccines. A vaccine today is worth a lot more than a vaccine a week or a month or a year from now, because the person you vaccinate today is not capable of passing on the disease. Whereas if you do it later, that you're going to have more cases than you would otherwise have. So I think it's interesting. It'd be interesting to find out why we were so slow to get them in the early going. We would know a lot more if the government were prepared to release the details of the contracts, but as they have not been so willing, then we're left to speculate.
Althea.
I feel like I'm between Andrew and Chantal on the assessment between Minister Anand. I think she has shown herself to be a quite efficient minister. She's definitely one of the bright stars in the Trudeau cabinet. She had a task and she did it well. I mean, it's hard to know when you are basically given an unlimited amount of money. She bought the most vaccine on the planet so that is, I don't know how to judge that, but I do think she's a good communicator in that she hasn't gotten herself into trouble. But she has left a lot of questions unanswered. And obviously, as a journalist, I don't like it when ministers do not answer questions. But we have no idea, to Andrew's point, whether there were penalties that the drug companies had to fork over some cash or extra doses or something because they didn't make the targets. There's lots of details that we don't know. And she still speaks in talking points. And when she doesn't speak in talking points, she's better. But perhaps with a little bit more confidence, she will communicate like a real person. But the talking points make me think that there's a lot more to dig under the surface.
Hey, welcome back. The At Issue panel's been taking some of your questions about the big stories of the past few months or the ones moving forward, because that's what you want to know as well. We'll get to a few of them right now. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea still here answering some of your questions. Here's Jordan's question about the next wedge issue.
I'm wondering what you think will be the wedge issue in fall election. I'm thinking similar to the niqab question in 2015 that lost the NDP Quebec, or the social conservatism question in 2019 that lost the Conservatives a lot of their urban votes.
Jordan's doing a lot of political analysis in that question. And I don't know if we can predict wedge issues, but Andrew, why don't you start us off?
Well, the issues that turn out to be decisive in elections are almost never the issues that are predicted to be. And there's a reason for that. When you can predict an issue is going to be a big issue, then the parties usually work to minimize their differences because they want to make sure that they just want to make sure they don't lose on the issue. Right. And so the issues that then crop up mid-campaign, the so-called wedge issues, are to some extent inherently unpredictable. But that being said, I'll just venture a guess that maybe this new hate law bill that the Liberals have brought forward, and pairing that with C-10, the Internet bill, et cetera, what may be being set up there is to frame the Conservatives, who will no doubt oppose that bill, as being soft on hate, whereas the Liberals can then present themselves as the defenders of the groups that would be most likely to be vulnerable to hate campaigns. So we may be seeing the beginnings of a wedge issue there, but that's as close to a prediction as I can make.
Okay, Chantal, that was a good prediction. I'll take it. Chantal?
I'm guessing we'd only see that if the Conservatives want to play in a movie that they already played in with the niqab ban. And I guess I hope, for the sake of the electoral debate, that is not the wedge issue. In the last election, the Conservatives wanted to make the carbon tax a wedge issue, and in the end, it turned against them. So whatever parties are planning or see as a wedge issue, I think in the end, it's going to boil down to the usual issue, which is the leadership issue. Have you seen enough of Justin Trudeau, or is Arsenault an acceptable alternative?
Althea.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew that I think that the Liberals are trying to set up that wedge issue with the hate crime legislation that was introduced on last Thursday. I think that we'll see similar issues. I don't know that they're the wedge issue, but like the abortion issue is still going to be there. C6, the conversion therapy bill, the fact that 2/3 of the Conservative caucus voted against that bill, that 2/3 of the caucus voted against a private member's bill to criminalize abortion and sex-selective abortions, but nevertheless, a bill that would have been very hard to implement, and that, in fact, a majority of Aaron O'Toole's shadow cabinet voted in favor of that piece of legislation. I think that issue will continue to plague him, especially in Quebec. In some ways, it's like the Liberals are dusting off their playbook, and these are things that they plan to talk about. You know, what will be the like Alan Kurdi of the 2021 election? I have no idea. I don't know what the unexpected event will be, but it could be François Legault. You know, he was not shy about injecting himself in the 2019 campaign, basically reprimanding Justin Trudeau over Bill 21. We know that Bill 96 is going to be being discussed in the fall. So if the campaign lasts long enough, it's possible that that emerges as a key issue. Who knows?
Yeah, if we all knew, we'd be geniuses and we get paid tons of money because we'd know everything about everything. Okay.
No, we'd be bored. We would be bored.
We'd be bored. That's right. That's an excellent
what's
point.
Interesting.
Yes,
is the things that you don't see coming.
That's right, and that's why we do these jobs. Okay, another election question. This time from an American viewer. Here's Anthony.
My question is regarding the next federal election and the fortunes or lack of the Bloc in Quebec. So what I'm wondering is, where do you see them landing in terms of seats after the next election? Somewhere closer to 2019, or is it possible that they end up somewhere in the pre-2011 Gilles Duceppe range of seat counts?
I love that this came from someone in the United States, and I love this question. Chantal, what do you think?
The Bloc is not going to have, I don't think, the kind of results it had during the Orange Wave in 2011 when it was crushed by Jack Layton. I don't see that happening. But I think its score is largely dependent on how weak the Conservatives are in Quebec. Because if the Conservatives are very weak, then the non-Liberal vote will coalesce around the Bloc. And that will allow them to win more seats. If the Conservatives do better than they've been doing in the polls, then the results should be in the same range as in the last election. The NDP I'm not mentioning because at this point the NDP in Quebec is not a huge factor in the calculus of the next election.
Andrew.
I would endorse most of that, or if not all of that. I think with the additional point, I think the Conservatives are very weak in Quebec. Yes. And that is notwithstanding having aggressively tilted, as Conservative parties always do, towards the nationalist vote on everything like, including allowing Quebec to collect its own income tax, or to collect the federal tax for them. Yes. And it never pays off for them. And you'd think eventually they would learn that this is not actually a big winning strategy for them. And so I think, yes, they will be weak.
It also seems as though the Liberals are really squeezing them there, too, by doing a lot of things that François Legault wants, Althea, in Quebec. Maybe that's a factor as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything Chantal said. I think that what we've seen in the last few weeks is basically all the main federal parties are trying to play on the Bloc's turf. And why would you have a nationalist party that a Quebec Nationalist Party here that is conservative, New Democrat, or liberal when you could just vote for the real thing? The Bloc is the none of the above vote in Quebec as well. So if you don't like anybody, it's a pretty safe place to park your ballot. Yeah. And the new leader has really shown that the Bloc can be very successful. The motion that was passed just this June that repeats many of the points in Bill 96, the language bill in Quebec that seeks to unilaterally amend the Canadian Constitution by using the notwithstanding clause to amend and suspend some rights that affect, the Anglophone minority in Quebec. It is remarkable that the Bloc was able, I think they got outmaneuvered, but it is remarkable that the Bloc was able to pass a motion like that. The Bloc has been a constructive player in the House of Commons. It has ditched every talk of sovereignty. Mr. Blanchet has been true to his promise during the last campaign. And so he actually has a record to point to when people say the Bloc does nothing in the House. He can say, no, that is not true. These are the pieces of legislation that we move forward, or we're a constructive player in Ottawa.
Okay, let's get one more question, I think. Here's Beth.
Will the opposition's relentless focus on attacking the Prime Minister personally help or hinder their election chances?
That was not actually our last question, our second last question. I think Beth probably likes the Prime Minister, but the question the question is a good one, because does going after the Prime Minister, who really represents the Liberal brand, does that work? And does it work better now that they've been in power for so long? Andrew, you start.
It's a tricky question because he's not the asset that he once was for the Liberal Party. If you go back to 2015, it was clear he was very much a positive asset for them. He now has, I think, a negative net rating, approval versus disapproval. Not nearly as bad as Aaron O'Toole's, but he's not a huge asset for it. So I'm not sure there's a lot to be gained. I'm not sure they have really had a relentless personal attack on the Liberal leader, but I'm not sure there'd be much gained in making it as personal as that either.
Chantal?
I think that he's actually, I agree with all that Andrew said, but I think he's actually in a stronger position than he was going in the last election with SNC-Lavalin, the resignations of some fairly strong female ministers, etc. He's in a stronger position. It's certainly not the rock star thing of 2015, but having navigated Canada through the COVID-19 pandemic has hardened the Prime Minister, and I think up to a point there is very little payoff in going after he's a weakling who can't do anything and who doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, those attacks probably won't be as effective anymore. Althea?
Yeah, the Prime Minister is a known quantity, and so I think that those attacks play well to the base, and they also play well to the Liberals' base, in that they feel like they need to defend their man. So it's more a thing partisans do to, for their own audience than it is that they do for the general population. I don't expect that we will see very, very personal attack ads during the election campaign.
Okay, here's the real last question. This is David.
I'm just wondering if of all the events that have taken place over the last 12 to 18 months, which events will be forgotten if they haven't already, and which events will still be in play?
That's a good question. So what out of this pandemic might continue to be something to solve or an issue if there is an election? Chantal?
I think we will be talking about Indigenous issues and reconciliation in a way that we have not in the past as a result of recent events. I don't think that's going to go away. I think the entire putting the government on trial in an election for rapid tests, vaccine deployment, etc., I don't think that's going to be happening.
Althea?
Well, I suspect that when the border reopens, because it will have to reopen at some point with the United States, the talk that we're hearing on both sides of the border about this could do lasting damage to the Canada-US relationship, I think that is going to be a tempest in a teapot. I think we will move forward from this unusual part of our history. I agree with Chantal. I also think one thing that we'll still keep talking about is long-term care and healthcare. I don't think that issue is going to be solved quickly anytime soon. I think we will still talk about that for months and probably years to come.
Andrew.
This wasn't a pandemic issue, but I don't imagine we'll be squeezing much more juice out of the We Charity scandal. Doesn't mean it wasn't important, and it didn't, and it will have some lasting impact in terms of people's perception of the Prime Minister. But the nature of these things is you move on. I do think the sort of cluster of issues that would combine Indigenous issues, energy, and the environment, because they're all kind of three sides of a triangle, that were very much top of mind before the pandemic hit, I think are going to come back with a vengeance. And we're, in the larger issue of managing that issue going forward in ways that keep the country whole. I mean, the divisions between Alberta and the West and the rest of Canada, the divisions between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous, these issues are potentially extremely fractious, and managing them in a way that keeps the country functioning, I think, is going to be a huge leadership challenge.
Okay, I know you guys don't believe me when I say how much I enjoy Thursdays, but I really do. And I appreciate you all sharing your thoughts and your experience with everybody and bringing context to a lot of important stories, particularly this year, which has been difficult for everyone. So thank you. I will miss you, but you are now free to take a short and well-deserved summer break for the next few weeks. Have a great summer. We will be back in a few weeks, unless there's an election, and we'll be back before.